Hey friends, welcome back to Homestead on a Prayer. Welcome back to my wild and overgrown late summer garden. We're actually going to be making some changes in the garden today. As you can see, there's a couple broccoli plants I left here, but for the most part, I pulled everything out of this bed and we're going to have a fresh start. In the back, I have another bed that is just completely a blank canvas. Today we're going to be planting some seeds for the fall garden. So you can see that I amended this bed with a nice thick layer of fresh compost. There are a couple broccoli plants here that didn't do anything over the summer, and they still look like they're in reasonably good condition. So I'm leaving those in here just to see if we get any kind of late harvest from these. I don't see any signs of a head yet, but I figured it wouldn't hurt to leave them in there a little longer and see what happens. So about a month or so ago, back in July, I did a video talking about what seeds I was still planting in my garden in July. So this is going to be kind of a similar video. It's August now, and we are going to definitely be more limited on the types of seeds that I can plant in this garden. So in that July video, I kind of talked about planting some seeds that can withstand a frost for fall, and some seeds for summer crops that have a really quick maturity date and that you would be able to harvest before a frost. Today, well, I may throw a couple of those same summer seeds in the ground. For the most part, today's focus is going to be on plants that can withstand a frost that we're going to be harvesting during the cooler months. So here I have a couple boxes of seeds I brought out. You can see I did bring out some summer squash. I think this is the only summer crop I'm going to plant because it does have a really quick maturity date and I have lots of extra seeds. Because I have so many extra squash seeds, it's not really that big of a risk to me. If some of these seeds I throw in the ground and don't end up yielding anything, I still have plenty more. It's not really going to cost me anything. But we also have lots of fall crops we're going to plant today. Now in my area, it's actually a little bit late to plant broccoli and cauliflower for the fall. I brought this packet out in case I decide to just throw a couple seeds in the ground and see what happens, but I don't anticipate getting a harvest from these. Normally when I am planting fall broccoli and cauliflower, I actually like to start the seeds inside my house first. I find that they get generally a little bit of a better start when they're in the house, when they're out of the really hot weather, and when they are separated from pests. This year, I know I say this really often, but it is true. I mean, life is busy. I just had a lot going on, and starting my fall broccoli wasn't a really high priority, so I didn't get to that. I may throw a couple in the ground and see what happens. Now, kale, you can see I also have kale here. Kale generally has a little bit of a shorter maturity date than broccoli because we're harvesting for the leaves rather than harvesting for the immature flower head. It's harvested at an earlier point in the growth cycle, which means that it's an earlier crop. You can also harvest kale as baby greens, which makes it an even earlier harvest. Now, similarly to broccoli, I do actually prefer to start my fall kale inside the house, just for the same reasons. I can control the environment completely. This year, I didn't do that. I'm going to try putting some kale seeds directly outside in the garden and see what happens. What I will do, if I get to it, which, there's a 50-50 shot of that, so we'll see what happens. I may also start some kale seeds inside my house and transplant those out a little bit later. And then that would actually be kind of interesting to do a side-by-side comparison and see how the kale started inside does compared to the kale direct sown in the garden. I also have some lettuce, definitely lots of time to plant lettuce, so we'll be sowing that. I have some Asian greens here, tatsoi, pak choi. We'll go through this as we sow some of these. And just some other greens, arugula and some other cold-tolerant greens. Carrots are a little bit of a gamble. If you live in an area with a later first frost date than me, my first frost date is usually the middle of October, but I know many places in the country or other parts of the world have a later first frost date, so if that's you, you might have lots of time to grow carrots. Carrots can withstand a little bit of a frost, especially as long as you protect them. I find in my area, carrots generally take quite a bit longer than the package recommends. I have not had the greatest success growing carrots. It's something that I try periodically here and there, and I'll usually get, an occasional good carrot, but for the most part, I just get tiny little carrots. I'm not sure if it's my soil. I'm not sure if I'm doing something wrong. I just haven't really been that successful with carrots. I do have a couple varieties in here that have quick maturity dates, so I may give those a try if I have some extra space. I may throw a couple of these in the ground and see how they do, maybe harvest them as baby carrots. I could possibly, depending on your area and your weather conditions, if you mulch your carrots really thickly, a lot of times you can keep them in harvestable condition, at least well into the winter, sometimes throughout the winter. As I said, that's going to be very area dependent. It's also going to be dependent on the variety of carrot that you're growing. So some other plants that you could sow now, which I'm not sowing, radishes are a great fall crop. They're really, really fast, so that can be a great option. Additionally, if you live in an area with a little bit of a later last frost than me, you probably have time to get another sowing of a lot of your quick maturing summer crops. Things like bush beans, things like cucumbers, summer squash, a lot of things like that can mature really quickly, and you might have time to get another succession sowing of those in. For today in my garden, I'll be focusing on the seeds that I shared with you. So in this bed here, you can see that I have these hoop supports still up. I use these to protect my broccoli from pests using insect netting over the season. Let's walk back to the other bed that I have prepped back here, and you can see that this is the same. I find that these hoop supports are really useful. During the summer, when I'm growing plants that tend to be really pest prone, like brassicas, broccoli, cauliflower, kale, all of those type of plants that are really susceptible to being munched on by caterpillars, I like to cover this with insect netting to keep the insects out. That works really well for plants like that don't require pollination. Additionally, these have another use. When it comes to fall growing, I can use these same hoops and I can cover this with a clear plastic cover. And it's a little bit of a delicate process. You don't want to do that too early in the season because then it kind of turns your tunnel into a mini greenhouse. And if it's still early in the season, if there's still a lot of heat, if the sun is still really strong, it can cook your plants. So I like to be really careful with that. But as the season goes on and as it gets cooler, I can cover this with plastic, and that can provide a little bit of insulation. And it can add a couple weeks onto my growing season and extend my harvest of cool weather crops. Things like cold-tolerant lettuces, cold-tolerant greens. It would be good for carrots, for kale, radishes. There's a lot of plants like that. You can really extend your season a little bit using this really simple season extension technique. So as I look through my seeds here, I'm going to prioritize what is most important to plant, which in my case is basically going to be all of these green leafy things, because these are things that I know I have a higher chance of success with and things that will last well into the season for me. So when it comes to growing lettuce, I do want to mention there are a lot of varieties of lettuce, and many of those varieties are specifically bred to grow in certain conditions. So there are a lot of varieties of lettuce that are specifically bred to be heat tolerant. They tend to be bolt resistant. Those are great for growing in the summer or if you live in a really hot climate. This time of year, because it's August, and I'm hoping for this to be my fall crop, and I'm hoping to extend it into the winter as much as possible, I want cold-tolerant lettuce varieties. So I have chosen a couple lettuce varieties out of the seeds that I have. There are many other cold-tolerant varieties out there. I just didn't want to order more seeds at this point, so I went through the seeds that I already have on hand and chose a few varieties that say cold-tolerant on the packet, or varieties that I've grown in the past and have seen to be cold-tolerant. So this super red romaine, on the packet said that it's cold tolerant. This tango leaf lettuce on the back of the package actually says that it can overwinter without protection. I'm assuming that that's area dependent. It might not be able to overwinter without protection in my area, but in some cases. So this one is red tinged winter. Even though there isn't much of a description on the seed packet, because it says winter in the title, I'm assuming that this is cold tolerant and worth a try. Marvel of Four Seasons, this is a great one. Cold tolerant, heat tolerant, just an all-around great lettuce. This is a summer lettuce. I think I'm going to stick with this selection here for now, and I think this will be a good start. I do actually already have a few lettuce varieties planted in another area of my garden. I have some Winter Density that I planted yesterday or the day before, and also some Butter Crunch. I used up those seed packets, but those are good ones for winter as well. So I have those planted. I think with these added into this area, I think we'll be off to a good start. Worst case scenario, and it would be so terrible if I had to order more seeds. But if I have to order more seeds, I can place a quick little order and get some more seeds for the garden. But I think that I'm happy with these as a start. You've seen me plant lettuce before. You know I like to plant it really thickly. Just make a little furrow in the soil. And then I take a nice thick sprinkling of seeds and just gently pinch the soil together on top. Over here, we'll do the same thing. I'm going to plant another variety. 3 rows of this tango leaf lettuce. I may only have enough seeds for 2 rows, but we'll see. Nope, 3 rows, perfect. So here I have my packet of Asian greens. I want to plant this tatsoi, this Asian green, these will be my priorities. Plus I'm going to get some arugula out of my other packet over there. And then if I have space, I may plant some pak choi as well. These I'm going to plant pretty similarly to the lettuce, but not quite so thickly. So I'll make the little furrow. I'll just try to space my seeds, you know, maybe half an inch or so apart. We'll see. We'll see how it works as I get sprinkling. I am going to, you know, I'll probably try to space these more like an inch apart. The arugula I'll sprinkle really thickly, just like I did with the lettuce. So this front bed here is all planted out with a variety of cold-tolerant lettuces and winter greens. So we're just going to let those sprout. It's supposed to rain over the next few days. Actually, I feel a little bit of a sprinkle right now, so hopefully that clears up so I can finish the back bed. But the rain will help this to germinate. This time of year when the soil is warm, these seeds are going to germinate really quickly. I expect to see some germination within just a couple days. And then we'll just watch them grow as the season goes on, and hopefully they'll last really well into the cool weather for us. So this back bed here will be mostly more of the same. I think this is where I'm also going to plant my kale seeds, and we'll see how those do. So I have a few different varieties of kale here. I'm going to try to lean more towards the more cold hardy kales. I have a scarlet kale, I have a blue curled Scotch, and a Russian red or ragged jack kale. I do also have a dazzling blue kale, which is a lacinato variety. That one, in my experience, hasn't been quite as cold tolerant as the others, so I may throw a couple of those in there. We'll see. They are really beautiful and I do really enjoy them. But I find that these are more likely to last the winter in my experience. So I'm going to focus on these with maybe a couple seeds of the dazzling blue thrown in as well. So these I'm going to space out a little bit more. I'll probably give them about 6 inches or so as opposed to the lettuce and the other greens that I planted really thickly. So I don't really have a specific plan here. I'm just going to plant these until it feels right, and then whatever space we have left, I'm going to fill in with more of those greens, maybe a couple carrots, we'll see. These two kales specifically, the blue curled Scotch and the Russian red, I find these are very cold tolerant, so these will be my focus. A few of the scarlet kale thrown in for color, and I think I will do a couple of these. I'll start with the blue curled Scotch. This is the really familiar kale that you're likely to see at the grocery store. And I'll just put 1 or 2 seeds in each spot. Maybe, I might be going slightly closer than 6 inches. This is maybe 4 inches or so apart. So I spaced my kales, you know, fairly evenly, and then spilled half of the rest of the seeds when I poured them back in the packet. So much for careful spacing. We'll see what happens with this kale. One other green that you can plant now is spinach. I will say I find spinach to be a little bit finicky in general in my garden. I find that spinach really needs an extended period of cool weather to grow well. So what I usually find is if I plant spinach in the spring, you know, it starts off well and then it bolts before it really gets to a significantly usable size. So for the most part, I don't really find it worth growing in the spring. What I'll try to do is plant it in the fall. And then either what will happen is it'll slowly mature as the weather gets cooler. Sometimes what happens is that my spinach will germinate. It won't really get to a usable size before winter, and then it'll kind of go dormant in the winter. But spinach usually in my area survives the winter, and then what happens in the spring, it kind of takes off, really early spring, because when you're starting from a seed in the spring, it takes a lot longer to get going, as opposed to a seedling that has an established root system. So the spinach that has overwintered, I find tends to take off really well in the spring and give me a really early harvest of spinach. So I'm going to try planting some spinach, and if we're not able to harvest it this fall and winter, it should give me an early harvest in the spring, so it's a win-win. And then additionally, I'm also going to plant a couple varieties of mache. Mache is a really cold-tolerant green. I find this one to be similar to spinach in that it tends to bolt fairly early on, and I find that it doesn't really like to germinate when it's hot out. Spinach doesn't really either. So it's kind of a similar thing. If I can get it going this fall, I may be able to get a great harvest this winter. If not, I'll get a really early harvest in the spring. So both of those cold-tolerant greens I'll be planting in the back half of this bed where we planted the front half all out with kale. So when it comes to these mache seeds, the final plants are really only a couple inches wide. They're pretty small. So I just kind of scatter the seeds over the bed and then just lightly cover them with soil. I don't even really worry about spacing when it comes to these. So thank you so much for hanging out with me in the garden today as we planted all these seeds in August, getting ready for what will hopefully be a nice, successful fall garden. I will say it is very challenging sometimes at this point in the season when it's hot, when you're burned out, it's humid, your plants are struggling, and the garden just demands so much of you this time of year. It is hard sometimes to make yourself do a little more and plant for the fall garden. But I find whenever I do plant for a fall garden, I'm so thankful later. You know, when summer's over and it starts to get cool and it starts to get darker, it's, at least for me, I would say it's probably true of a lot of gardeners, but at least for me, it's a very challenging time of year because I really thrive when it's warm out and it's sunny and I can just spend time outside. When it starts to get cooler, and we as gardeners don't have a lot of that in the fall, at least if you live in a cool area like I do, I find that having something that I can harvest from the garden at that time of year really does help so much, not to mention it's delicious. Additionally, there's a lot less pest pressure in the fall. There's a lot less disease pressure in the fall. It's overall, and then obviously there's the obvious benefit of it's just cooler and easier to work in the garden. So I find that it's definitely worth taking a little bit of extra time in the summer, just powering through and growing yourself a fall garden. On that note, it is starting to rain, which is great because that's going to water in all the seeds I just planted. So I'm going to head inside, but thank you so much for hanging out with me. I hope that you're having a great day. I'd love to hear what seeds you're planting for your fall garden. I can't wait to see you soon. I'll see you next time.